Today we shall discuss the urban economy in Mughal India. Last time we had discussed the urban morphology, in which I had mentioned that there is one or several economic base or bases in the urban areas. Today we shall discuss what are these bases. As we know that in Mughal India, perhaps like that of Sultanate India, there is an interaction between the urban area and the rural area. And it is this interaction which gives the process of urbanization as well as the process of growth or decline. In Mughal India, it is stated that it is the golden age of urbanization. If we look at it purely from the statistical point of view, it is certainly a correct one. And it is a correct one principally because of the economic function, the economic interaction between the urban area and the countryside, the growth of agriculture and manufacture, that had made it the golden age of Mughal India. Now we come, therefore, to discuss the nature of the cities or the towns on the basis of the economic operations of the urban areas, not speaking of the social milieu, not speaking of the social mixing or the administrative setup, which we shall discuss later. But today we shall mainly see the functions of the urban areas in Mughal India, their nature, the characteristic features, the reasons of their growth or reasons of their decline. The best way to understand this urban economy, perhaps, is to divide the urban areas into several classifications. For example, the first one that we think of is to mention the capital cities, Delhi, but it first come Agra first, then Delhi, and in between Lahore and Fatehpur Sikri to a certain extent. These capital cities were enormous urban areas. They had several economic bases of their own. What are these bases? In a city like Delhi or Agra or Lahore, certainly, we see three aspects of the function of the urban area. One is which is the usual one and on which the travelers had written much, the consumption of the town, that is the consumption of the people of the town, people meaning nobility, administrative setup and all kinds of demands which are generated in a capital city. And the second is, therefore, the marketing of this consumption, how this consumption demands are met. And third, in some cases more, in some cases less, but nonetheless, the manufacturing activities connecting with the urban areas, principally done in the suburbs of the big urban cities. Now, if we look at the consumption pattern and the market as such, there are different kinds of markets. It is no use saying that there was a market or there were markets. The markets are of different kinds. For example, in a city like Delhi or Agra, there were always the wholesale markets, which are not within the city itself. These are always outside the city wall, even beyond the river on the other side. Agra has grown exactly like that. Delhi has grown exactly like that. The reason is that most of the caravans which come, very big group of people called Banjaras, they come with the provisions, salt or rice or pulses, etc. They can come up to the river. It is very difficult for them to cross and come inside the city where they do not have the place to camp, about 4,000 or 5,000 bullocks. So therefore, the growth of the market, of this wholesale market, is almost always on the other side of the river, where gradually the suburbs grow and where gradually a township grows also. That is one kind of market. But in a big city like Delhi, we can see the hierarchy of markets showing the functions of the economic functions of the city itself. For example, the wholesale market is there. From there, the other dealers bring the provisions into the city. Then these are gathered in a very big market before going into the retail market. Or in other words, there is a small wholesale market inside the city. For example, in Delhi we have Sabji Mandi, the vegetable market, which is itself a wholesale market of vegetables. And then we have the third one, the lowest one, the retail markets, which are most cases, and certainly in case of Delhi and Agra, in each mahalla or ward. And sometimes these markets are enclosed markets, like the Persian markets in Persia. And they close in the evening, they open in the morning. The mahalla gate closes in the evening, opens in the morning. There are porters to do this at the public cost. So there are different kinds of markets depending on the economic function of the city. For example, in case of Delhi, we have one slave market where horses and slaves, including women slaves, are sold. And this practice had continued from the Sultanate period down to the end of the 18th century. Even in 1773-74, Count of Modave, a French merchant, had seen such a market and had described it very clearly. So this market of slaves is outside the city of Delhi itself, outside the wall, but is linked with it by economic functions. So therefore, in a capital city, as the city grows, the market grows. As the market grows, with the growth of the consumption, there grows also the other activities like manufacturing, which are grown in the suburbs. The artisans very rarely can come and stay inside the city. Francois Bernier, who was there in Delhi, as also in Agra, had stated that the artisans come in the morning and go away in the evening, because they cannot stay actually. inside the city itself. They stay in the suburbs, sometimes outside the walls, or sometimes just close to the walls inside, at the border of the wall. So therefore, the manufacturing activities, all kinds of things, quilts, mats, lamps, etc., of daily use, these are all manufactured in those places. So therefore, the principal thing remains is that there is a very good linkage between the surrounding area, between the cultivated area, between agricultural growth and the urban area itself, and it is this growth that leads to the Golden Age. The second type of town become more or less the same. These are the provincial headquarters, sometimes the capitals of the provinces, but there the growth has a history which is sometimes different, sometimes the same as those of the capital cities. For example, in Murshidabad, which grows from the early 18th century in Bengal, already it was a market town, small market town called Maqsudabad, and then close by it, Kasim Bazar has become very famous earlier because of the raw silk production and market. The factories were made, the foreigners were there, the French had their factories, English had their factories, Dutch had their factories, the Armenians had a thriving trade, and then the Murshidabad grows next to it. So there is a kind of linkage between the urban area of Kasim Bazar, which was not really urban in that sense, but a sort of a very big village, and Murshidabad itself. And the same kind of thing we can see in Burhanpur in the Deccan. It was a small village. It was very famous for cloth. The Armenians used to buy this and send this to the Middle East. When Aurangzeb was the provincial governor of the Deccan, he used to stay at Burhanpur, and then it began to grow. But therefore, the areas of the provincial headquarters, the growth of the towns, depends on various factors. But to me, it is always connected with some kind of manufacturing activity or artisanal activities nearby or within this urban area that had given it the impetus of the growth. This is not to be seen in case of Delhi or Agra or even Fatehpur Sikri. Lahore to a certain extent, but not in those three other cities. So therefore, the growth of the provincial cities, I can cite some more other examples if necessary. This can be done like that, but there are other towns which are not connected with either with the manufacturing activity, either with the agricultural growth of the nearby villages, or either of other factors. This was done simply because the ruling class or the king or the sultan wanted it to grow, had established itself. Mandu, for example, in Malwa, was one of those cities. And therefore, there are complexities, the different forces operating in different ways in different regions which give growth to the urban economy of that place, and that gives growth to the nature of the town or the city it grows within. The third kind of urban area, which is very much dependent on the urban economy, on its economy itself, far more than the capital cities or the provincial headquarters, the small cities. sometimes on the crossroads, sometimes in other areas, but they always have an economic base. And it is this economic base that leads them to become the urban area, the town. It is the far more closer in that sense with its surrounding production of agriculture, with the production of cash crops, for example, sugar, opium, in some case indigo. These are the cash crops which are sold in cash in the market. And this growth, the growth of these cash crops, the growth of this kind of production that leads to the establishment of these kind of towns. In a recent research, Professor Shirin Musvi has shown that so far as the density of the urban population is concerned, Gujarat certainly leads the others. She has come to this conclusion from a survey of the revenue received per acre from Gujarat, from Bengal, as well as from the Delhi regions. Now, if we look at Gujarat, we see that there were so many important towns quite close by, quite close to one another, which is not there in most of the other cases. During the time of Akbar, Nizamuddin Bakshi, in charge of the army, around 1590, has written the book called Tabaqat-e Akbari. And in this book, Nizamuddin stated that there were in the Mughal Empire 120 big towns and 3,200 kasbas. Kasbah is a big village with a market, sometimes walled, sometimes unwalled. Now, if we take Nizamuddin's statement and if we compare it with the research done by Professor Shirin Musvi, we see that most of these are located in Gujarat by the time Shah Jahan had finished his days. Now, this would lead us to the economic basis of certain towns. We know that certain towns had particular functions, particular economic operations of particular commodities. For example, Lahore was famous for the production of arms and ammunitions as well as of leather works. Patna in Bihar, particularly from the beginning of the 18th century, became quite famous for the production of saltpeter and opium. So therefore, certain areas had certain types of production, and often these commodities are known by the names of the towns they produce. For example, at Chanderi, a particular kind of cloth is produced, and it is called Chanderi cloth. In Dhaka, we had muslin, which is, everybody knows, Dhakai muslin, and so on and so forth. There was also the muslin in Burhanpur, but that's not much in quantity or in quality comparable to those of Dhaka. So therefore, the smaller cities, they were there, they could not be wished away, they did not grow, they remained quiet, small, urban areas, engaged with their economic functions, but did not go beyond that. It is very rare that they had grown up to a very big size. Burhanpur is one, but that's because perhaps of Aurangzeb's presence. The next type of town, which is perhaps the most important one after the capital cities, was the port towns. We know that in Mughal India, at different times, there are 4 different ports of very high order. Surat, of course, was the leader. Then we had Masalipatnam after the Mughals had taken over Golconda. It flourished under Golconda actually and declined under the Mughals, but it was still there. It was very famous for the kind of a cloth, jeans cloth, red color, very famous, taken by the Europeans in bulk. Then we have Hooghly, which came up actually from the late 17th and early 18th century. So among these 3, Cambay was there, of course, but Cambay was declining and Surat came up. It has been stated that the rise of Surat since the early 17th century was due to the fact that the river of Cambay was silting. But in the early 19th century, the English had done 2 hydrographic tests and they had found that the river had not changed. Actually, the decline of Cambay has nothing to do with it, neither the rise of Surat to do anything with Cambay. Cambay continued to do overseas trade even after the decline of Surat as well. So whatever it is, in these port towns, we have the basic economic function of the import and export. Now, this is not a very easy one to describe in the sense that the goods are taken, collected from the hinterland by a certain class of people, brought into the port. In the case of Surat, it is about 10 miles distant from the river on the river Tapti, and behind the custom house there was a Maidan where the goods are kept. The ships come with their goods. Immediately the dalals, the middlemen appear. They fix up the prices. They make the necessary contacts and the goods are then brought out through the custom house after paying the taxes. But the principal economic function of the port itself is the distribution of the imported goods, the collection of the export goods to be done by different sets of people, and it is the duty of the Shabandar, the principal superintendent of the port, to see that there is no problem, such as law and order problem or other problems. But then it depends to a great extent on the captain. It depends to a great extent on the sort of a sheriff of the town or mayor of the town or some officers of the town to see that the proper management is done. In Surat, sometimes it has led to fighting even. Now, in case of the other port town, there is the problem of, as well as in case of Surat also, the problem is of the goods coming from the outside by land which are to pay taxes. There are the land taxes also, both import and export. And there are certain doors which are earmarked in almost every big port town for the goods coming from the land or going towards the land. And this we know very well from the history of Cambay, from history of Surat and from other areas. Apart from these, import and export, there is a manufacturing activities. As I have said in Cambay, in the suburbs, the artisans manufacture the cornelians. But the principal manufacture of Gujarat was the cloth. All kinds of cloth are manufactured both in the suburbs as well as in the suburbs of Cambay, in suburbs of Surat, in suburbs of Bharuch or Broch, etc. So therefore, it's a combined operation, a combination of the operation, and in this combination, not only the shipping schedule has to be seen, the dalals had to be properly contacted, but the authorities must also be kept in contact, kept in check in certain cases, so that there is no problem. So it is this combined economic activities, multifarious economic activities that created the economic base of the towns. So the urban economy, particularly in case of Mughal India, grew at a rapid pace because of the rapid growth of agriculture with which it is intimately connected. And in this rapid growth of agriculture, there is the growth of the cash crops, which began to grow very quickly. Indigo, for example, being shipped overseas almost by everybody. Then sugar, the same. Opium in case of Bihar, Patna and Chapra. So therefore, the question of the urban economy should be seen in their economic functions properly. And this growth in the 17th century, Mughal India, was partly due not only to the uniform administrative system that the Mughals had set up, not only due to the law and order that they had maintained for a fairly long time, but also due to a large number of Europeans who had come, the Indian merchants who had come, of their demands, of their supply by the artisans and so forth. Yet, all in all, in the urban economy, one fact remains unaltered since the days of the Sultanate. It is that the peasants in the surrounding countryside and artisans within the urban area remained as poor as ever. Whether the ladins or the reals or the piastras or the pounds or French pounds come, it is the same. Their condition did not change.